Oh man, every time I watch that, I'm like, oh, I get this like lump in my throat. It's like so true. It's endurance. Like this is it. You know what I mean? Never ever stop. Like never good enough is never good enough. Like Paul Rand, one of the greatest designers of all time, designed some of the most recognizable brand marks ever. You said it all the time. You know, like no matter how good you think something is, it can always be improved, especially in digital. Like this isn't print. We don't like spit things out and walk away from it and be like, oh, that was great, put it on a shelf. No, like you can always continually improve things, and that's the attitude you should always have. Striving for the top, trying to be the best, always pushing forward. And this, if you wanted the formula for how to make good work, it's that. It's just brute force. That's it. Like there's no substitute for experience. There's no formula that's going to make you better. There's no process that's going to make your work better. At the end of the day, it's just about brute force. You know, oh, whoops. Oh, yeah. Like this is an average creative review at the beginning of any project, and you'll notice that there's a mixture of things here. There's like fully fleshed out visual design, some wireframes here. There's this thing which I love. We did this for MoMA, and one of the visual designers came and he just hung up a picture of a chair, and all of us were like, "What are you doing? Like, that's just a picture of a chair. You didn't do anything." And he's like, "Look at it. You know." It sells itself. We don't need to say anything about this. You don't need to add a bunch of crappy UI to it. You don't need to add flare and lens flare and swooshes or whatever the new hip thing is. The damn thing is fucking awesome by itself. Somebody put hours and years of their life into designing this thing. Like, just make a big ass picture of it and put it there so you get the same experience like on the screen that you would get if you walked into the store and could actually walk around and play with this thing. All this is to say is the more hours that you put into something, the better it's going to be. I do think there's a point when you can overthink something, but the refinement process never stops. And accepting that you've reached something that's acceptable is unacceptable. I have never once, like in 15 years of building websites professionally, I have never once experienced a product launch that I was happy with. Like not one. Even that Four Seasons example that I'm actually really happy with now, when it went out, I was just like, oh, there's that one thing that could have made it better. And like, you just dwell on all the little things that you could have improved upon. Because ultimately, like, you can get 85% of the thing right, but it's that 15% that makes it just like exquisite, you know? If you look at like an iPhone, for instance, there was a lot of other mobile phones out in the world, but they like reinvented the industry. If you look at the iPad or the iPod, when that came out, there was other MP3 players out there, but they were crap. And Apple like came and was like, no, that's not good enough. We're gonna do something better. Even like the Bic pen, you know, like sort of the most ubiquitous tool in anybody's desk. When that came out, it was revolutionary, and it was just because some guy decided that fountain pens weren't good enough, and he was going to figure out a way to like not make a mess of yourself when you were writing. It's true. The more work that you do, the better it's going to get, and the video that I just showed is just kind of evidence of that. Like, you know, when I'm 85 years old, whatever digital looks like at that point, I want to still be cranking away at it, because frankly I don't know what I would do if I wasn't. There's not, like, my parents actually when I was a kid gave me the worst advice ever, which was find something you love and make that your job because you'll never work a day in your life. That's not true. You'll work all the time because you've ruined a perfectly good hobby. I wish my dad had been like, Josh, go into, you know, hedge fund management. It'll make you filthy rich, and then you can like do art on the side. And then I would go to work, be miserable all day, then go sit on my yacht and like paint or something. But no, I didn't do that. I made it my job, and so you know, I travel all the world and do this stuff 24 hours a day. And my girlfriend hates me because I never see her. But you know, it is what it is. That's what we do. You know. Harsh. The last thing I want to talk about in terms of execution is prototyping. There's this whole thing about rapid prototyping now, and I think it's like the new sort of hot thing to talk about. Like, oh, the rapid prototype has replaced the wireframes, or has replaced the wireframe, which I honestly do feel is a dangerously naive point of view. We usually do 3 types of prototypes, and I think the rapid prototyping one fits under this one. It's experimenting. For feature level stuff that you just need to hash through a bunch of different things to find out the way that it works. It's really, really useful. But there's another kind of prototype that we do a lot, and it's this experience one. And this is what we show in usability studies. The reason I have to leave tonight is because I'm going tomorrow at 6 o'clock in the morning to go to usability study, and I have to make sure the prototype is in order so that it can be done. But basically, experience prototypes typically, especially for more complicated things like when we do checkout flows or something like that, it tends to be a series of wireframes that are strung together with image maps, and just hot linked together. Because what you need to be able to do is basically change UI very quickly without having to muck through a bunch of code. I do think it's very, very important for every UX person to understand code and to be able to do a little bit of it. In fact, it's a prerequisite to work on my team at this point. You don't have to know it coming in, but you've got to be willing to learn at least. But the thing about prototyping that I understand very clearly is that often when you jump into prototyping, the concepts that you're able to execute are driven by what you know about code. And I'm a much better UX person. I'm much better at knowing what people need and how they want to use things than building the actual mechanics of how that works. I would much rather hand that over to a developer and have them worry about media queries and CSS and all that kind of stuff. I would much rather spend my time thinking about how things work and making them work. And also, this is another point where I'll say, there's been all this talk about wireframes and rapid prototyping, but visual design is something that I don't think a lot of user experience designers pay a lot of attention to. But the thing that I've been saying for years is that visual design is interaction design, and having an understanding of how graphic design works will make you a better interaction designer. If you look at the dynamics of a page layout, or if you look at like movie posters, for instance, there's interaction there. Like when you look at a poster, there's a primary message that they want to convey, there's a secondary message, there's a tertiary message, and the way the page is laid out, like how the hierarchy, page structure, color, clarity, all that kind of stuff, how that's put together, it informs how you interact with that. And it's totally hands-off, and it's totally a thing that happens in your head, but someone is controlling that experience and put a lot of thought into how you experience that thing visually. And I've seen a million wireframes that academically, you can look at it and be like, yes, your touch affordances are in the right place, and you've made calls to action clear. However, this page looks like shit, and no one's gonna sit here and look at it because it's impossible to see. And there's this problem at Huge for years that interaction designers would hand over wireframes to visual design, and visual design would be like, that's cool, and they'd throw it away and they'd start over and do whatever they wanted. And it was because they speak a different language, they speak a visual language, but everyone speaks a visual language. And there's a great article actually in A List Apart, and you should look it up. It's what is it called? It's called In Defense of Eye Candy, I think that's what it's called. And basically there's a couple of references in it to, they did these tests with physical devices. I think they were like gas pumps and things. And they took gas pumps that functioned identically. They made one that looked very clean and put together, and it looked pristine and looked very modern. And they had another one that looked crappy and broken down and all that kind of stuff. I think they did this with bank machines too. And what they found was people had the same errors, they ran into the same problems, but when they ran into the problems on the machine that looked bad, they blamed the machine, they blamed the interface, and they're like, oh, this thing's broken, I can't use it. When that same experience happened in the clean machine and the one that looked like it was that it would work correctly, they blamed themselves for those mistakes. And to be totally cynical, I would say I would much rather people blame themselves for my mistakes than blame me. That's terrible, but take that to heart, please. The last. The last kind of prototype that we do is videos, and I had never experienced anybody doing this before I started working at Huge, and I'm not sure how much people do them outside of our company, but I'll just show an example here of one of the video prototypes we did. This was for the iPad app for HBO Go, and basically the thing we wanted to convey to the client and then put in front of users was just this, like how these transitions worked and how the thing actually feels when you're using it. And there's no way that I could have coded this. You can't convey this in a wireframe. The UI is very, very sparse and very, very minimal. So the bulk of the experience is really informed by like how the thing feels when it moves around and how it feels when you touch it and how you interact with it. And the fastest way to get to that, to kind of get the point across of how we wanted it to work, was just to make a video of it. So really, this all leads to this. It's the thing that makes people love what you've made. And the whole thing of Huge is make something that you love, right? Basically all of this, like never accepting that anything is good enough and constantly trying to refine and pushing forward and using the best tool to express what you're trying to make, it's what leads to this. But at the end of the day, when you get through vision and execution, you've basically got a hypothesis. You don't really know whether what you have come to is successful until you get the feedback. And all these things I've been saying is, like never accept good enough. But like it's our job to take risks, and be bold during the design phase. It's a safe environment, like if you can't fail in front of the people that you work with, you work at the wrong place. Frankly, like you should be encouraged to fail because you don't want your client to fail, and most of all, you don't want users to fail. At the end of the day, like we're all here to win, right? And we're all here to be number one, and like we want to like make the best thing in the world. And best practices are going to work, right? Like that's why they're called best practices. The first thing you should do is just write the best practice stuff down, make a comp of that, throw it aside, and then start doing other stuff, because that's the stuff that's going to push the envelope, and that's the stuff that's going to push the industry forward, and that's the stuff that's going to push like the art of design forward. But like when you put it in front of these people, you want this, You want this. You want people to smile when they look at stuff. You want to put stuff in front of users and have them be delighted. And until that happens, until you put things in usability studies and actually see how people react to it, you don't really know whether or not what you've done is correct. And it's a lot better for people to be like, oh, this is crap in a usability study than to have it happen when you've pushed live and the client spent millions of dollars and they come back to you and be like, you're an idiot. You don't know what you're talking about. We're getting trash. So that there's that. The other thing is about feedback is analytics, obviously. Analytics are incredibly important, but I would say I've worked in places that will really remain nameless. You can probably guess what they are, that rely almost solely on analytics to drive what they're going to do next. And I basically equate this to driving your car while looking in the rearview mirror. Like if all you're doing is looking at the results of what you've done, you're never going to move forward. I think there's a lot to be said for using your gut and using your instinct and kind of predicting based on your own expertise, like where things are going and what the right next step is. I would never ever suggest not looking at analytics, but analytics are part of a story. They're not the entire story. But basically, like all the stuff leading up to this, once you've figured out what the oh, this is cut off. This is supposed to say once the key parts of the experience are set, everything else is easy. It doesn't say that, which is confusing. But basically, once you've figured out what you're doing and where you're going, you can go back to something more production-oriented and closer to waterfall. But because we still work as a team, it's not pure waterfall. I think waterfall is really helpful because you end up, and there's a lot of times when, especially on larger, we do a lot of platform rebuild stuff, and there's just basically no way that you can just do rapid wireframing through that stuff, and there's no way that you can kind of like do everything all at once. You have to basically make it sequential because you don't have the opportunity to make as many mistakes when you're really far along and a lot of stuff has already been done. So for stuff like that, it is important to basically break things out and say like, okay, here's the information architecture. Here are the wireframes. This is what visual design is going to look like. Here's what the technology development stuff is going to look like. And then basically asset development comes last, right? It's just like, here's all the stuff that goes into the site. But once you've got all this stuff done, you push live, this is the last step, evolution. And I recognize that it's kind of idiotic that there's a picture of me in the slide, but like I said, these are slides that we actually show in a deck, so I'm famous, I'm in a deck. But the point of evolution is that it's that whole thing of good enough never being good enough. And once you get to the end of the process, you go into the evolution phase, and the process, it just starts all over again. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Josh, very much. We have about 10 minutes for questions because taxi is waiting.
Don't press on that so much. It's not a big deal.
I've just talk to the pilot, Talk to the pilots at the airport.
They don't wait. It's fine.
No. Even for huge clients, they don't.
How do you meet deadlines if you always improve your work?
The question was how do you meet deadlines if you're always improving your work? At some point, you just stop. I mean, when the deadline happens, actually. I'm a firm believer in the fact that constraints drive better stuff, right? I was telling somebody earlier that like the reason I don't have a portfolio on the web right now is because I'm the client and I have infinite time and infinite budget, to do whatever I want. So I just do nothing because I'll like play around with something for a minute and be like, oh, I'm not happy with it, throw it aside and do something else. So all that stuff about process or internal processes and technical constraints and timeline and budget, that does inform the work that you do, and it gives you a problem to solve. I would say like how many people here have worked a 100-hour week? Not too many. I've done it probably 8 or 9 times in the last year. And that's kind of the answer to your question. Like, you stop when you have to stop, but you cram in as much shit as you can ahead of that because it is going to make the work better. Maybe I'm insane, and my Twitter profile says I'm better at not sleeping than you, and that's that's what it is. I don't sleep, so for better or worse, I guess.
Any other questions?
Come on.
Yeah, there is one. There is one.
Thanks for the presentation. Your deck said you don't have any developers on your team. Yet, at the same time, you said you guys want to understand how the development works, and you record these videos. And then I'm not sure how it works on your side. Do you hand this over in a waterfall kind of process? You hand this over to a development agency that is not a part of your team?
Yeah.
Given that everything you said, it's kind of get more fuzzy in a matter of years, that the development is still kind of a development decision is kind of a design decision.
Yeah.
So what's your view on this? I mean, will you have more developers on your team, or will you learn development?
That is very, very perceptive. Yes, so Huge is a full-service digital agency. Our skill set runs from marketing all the way through development. We have a huge development team that sits on the second floor of our Brooklyn office. We have a development team in London. We have an entire office in Brasilia that's just developers. The example I showed, there was no specific developer in that group. However, our interaction design / UX department is a little bit different from other places that I've been that are strict disciplines like that. Like I've built front-end frameworks before for clients, and I know how to do CSS and JavaScript and HTML, like production-ready codes kind of stuff. And that's why I say that it's a prerequisite that any UX person on my team knows how to code. They don't need to know that good, but it's kind of expected that user experience people know that stuff. And actually, in Brooklyn, we have a team that's called Product Design, which is actually the team that I came up through before I moved over and became an experience director. And that team is basically a team of generalists. Like when I first started, I built my first website in like 1996 or something like that. There was no interaction design discipline at that point, right? I was actually excited when IE6 came out because it had better features than IE 5.5 did, and now I just can't wait for it to die. But basically, like I was a graphic designer that knew how to code, and so like I learned interaction design kind of in the interim, and I came at it from this side and this side, and then the middle stuff kind of worked itself out. We do whenever like. I'm actually talking to a developer right now who's probably sending me emails as I'm talking about this, who's building a prototype for this usability study tomorrow. And it's one of those things where we both get into Git, and I like go and look at things from a user experience standpoint, and he fills the holes that I can't fill because he's a better developer than I am. But we definitely do have a very close relationship with development. There's just it's more of a pragmatic decision about when development rolls on full steam because there's all these front end and UI is one thing, and you can kind of fake it a lot, like when you're just trying to figure out what you're doing, and then you can hand it over to somebody to make it pristine and perfect and work in every browser and all that kind of good stuff. So it's really a case-by-case basis when development rolls on. But I definitely sort of push the idea that it's better to make it work and then refine it later. We usually prototype to work in Chrome, and then don't worry about anything else, just to get to that point of like putting it in front of the client, putting it in front of a user, and getting some feedback. And then development will roll in kind of in the same way as asset production does, or detailed visual design does, or when you get in like really work out the specifics of IA. I think like what I'm talking about here is it's a process that we usually implement in like new projects where you're starting fresh and you have to like basically do a full kind of redesign of something. The upfront is very chaotic and messy, and you're just kind of trying a lot of things and throwing a lot of things away. And in that context, it's not really important to have somebody who knows how to optimize something for file size and page weight and all that kind of stuff, SLA times SEO, like how like semantically correct your code is. It's kind of irrelevant when you're just like creating. And that's why I say like there's kind of a mixture of processes that we use where it's similar to Agile at the beginning and then more waterfall towards the end when you get into a production mode where it's like, okay, here's our template list that we have to get. We need to get sign off on every single one of these templates from the client. You roll through that in wireframe so there's none of those uncomfortable conversations in visual design. Visual design rolls in and then they do the same thing. They take the wireframes. Hopefully they don't stray from them too far, and then they can just have a conversation specifically about what look and feel is accomplishing and whether or not that's meeting the goals of the brand and all that kind of stuff. And the user experience stuff is already set and locked and won't get messed with. And then once all that stuff's figured out and like we've got real specifics of here are the pages we need, here's the functions we need, here's where it needs to work, here's what it looks like, here's how it feels, then you can basically pass it over to a team of developers and they can be like, okay, what's the best implementation solution that'll work on all devices, it'll work in every context, it's light on page weight, it comes up high in Google search ranking and all that kind of stuff. Does that answer your question?
Okay.
I have a tendency to ramble, so. More questions, come on. Grill me. I was at a client meeting yesterday and their questions were much harder than these.
So I do have actually two questions. The first one is you said evolve. And you also said that you have a deadline and then that you cannot pass. So what I'm wondering is after you're done with the design and you implement something in production, do you kind of go back after a while and to reevaluate, or does the client need to come back to you and say like, oh, we don't like it anymore? Or how do you do it? How do you keep the connection?
Phase 2. There's always this like amorphous phase 2 that's going on. We normally like in concepting, in the concept phase, like when you're just kind of figuring out what you're going to do and what the thing could possibly be, you come up with a lot of ideas that are really good and really smart and really cool, but because of time frame, development capabilities, or tech capabilities, like platform stuff, and also internal process capabilities, they just can't be executed. So a lot of times, as you're doing the first phase of work and you start to run up against that deadline, you already know kind of what the next stuff that you want to work on is, and it's really cool because at some point in a project, if you've done everything right in the run up, and the client likes you and they like working with you and it's fun and every time and they look forward to coming to meetings with you and you look forward to going to meetings with them, they can't wait to actually like make the thing better. And like I feel like this attitude that we kind of have, it's addictive, and it's contagious. And once you go in and it's very easy when you work in house to get bogged down in the mundane drudgery of your own sort of limitations and stuff like that, and it gets a little bit harder to think in other ways around those problems. And what we try to do is come in and help that process along and help people see like, oh yeah, you do have this constraint, but this is actually like you can use this to your advantage, or we can get around this in this way. And then yeah, that person said that, but let's interpret it this way. The interpretation game is my favorite thing in the world. When someone's like, this is horrible, it's like, well, what I'm actually hearing is, but yeah, I mean, like, in every project I've worked on, typically, like, the stuff that you're going to do after you launch your first sort of minimum viable product, it's already figured out. And then as you start to hash through that stuff, like, more ideas come up, and you move forward from there. The other thing, too, is, like, we always try to set up ahead of time that, like, mistakes will be made. Stuff will get through without us catching it until it goes live, and there's those aha moments of like, oh, we totally didn't think about that, and now it's a huge problem, and then we'll go back and quickly figure out how to fix it and execute against it. So that's why I say, like, I think, like, whenever we set up anything, evolution is always part of the expectation that we set right at the very beginning of, you know, when we're done, we're not actually done. We're going to, like, keep going because this is it's an evolving, like, discipline. It's an evolving, like, digital is an evolving thing by its nature. So you can never just put something down and walk away from it.
Well, okay, so that drives me to the second question that I had. Is
oh, you set me up.
Is how you measure, because you said at the beginning is like you showed a design to a client and he said this is trash, so you said that might be a great idea. So how do you measure at the end? Because of course a client is going to say, okay, this is trash, I'm not going to pay for it. So how do you finally kind of make him say, like, yes, that was a great design and it was worth paying for? How do you gather this feedback? How do you measure it?
How much time do you have? There's a lot of answers to that question, and it comes down to, like, the specific instance of when it happens. You know, you measure things in a lot of different ways. I think subjective. I mean, I started out as a visual designer, and I got out of visual design because I hated how subjective it was. And you could basically show somebody something, and they'd be like, "I hate this because it's blue." I'm like, okay, thanks for the really constructive feedback, buddy. And that will happen. But I think it's semi-avoidable in a lot of situations, just by like gaining the client's trust and making them feel like they're part of the process running up. I think you run into those kind of situations where people, like, at the end are like, ah, this is awful, because they don't feel any sort of sense of ownership. And making people feel a sense of ownership while you're working on something, it's one of the most invaluable things you can do. And I think it's all about that initial setup. And it's why I say, like, in terms of UX, being in the stakeholder interviews and trying to basically really make people aware that you're listening and aware that you're taking their concerns at heart, and trying to find out, you know, what makes them tick, you know, like what do they value, all that kind of stuff. You'd be surprised just by doing those little things and making people feel special. It avoids a lot of those very subjective conversations. The other thing too is I read a lot of books about debate and negotiation. so often someone will come back and be like, oh, I hate this. And I'm like, why? And then they'll say, and I'm like, so what are you suggesting that's better? And then they'll be like, nothing. Okay, then we're doing what I said. And then we move on. That works better sometimes than others. Other times it's like, how dare you? But yeah, whatever. You take the good with the bad, I guess.
But this would be the last one, because I don't want to be responsible for Josh being in Warsaw.
All right, look at this. This is what I'm talking about. This guy knows user experience, man. He's making my experience unbelievable. These guys are the best. This is the best conference I've been to in forever. I can't state that enough. Like, amazing.
And that wasn't set up, no?
No. There was a person waiting for me at the airport with, like, the placard with my name on it. I was like, what? This is, like, literally, that had never ever happened to me before. I was like, I'm like a celebrity. This is amazing. I'm just some guy who makes wireframes. Everybody's looking at me like, who's that guy? I'm like, I'm the guy who's got a person waiting for me. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so when you presented your team before, you said everyone works on everything. Now, I have a personal question. I come from development, and I always think that my wireframes are just ugly, because I'm not a graphics designer, but I focus on interaction. Mm-hmm. Do you think there's room for people that focus on interaction and that's all they do, or should we actually really be cross-functional and everyone should know a little bit of everything? Or is there, in teams like even you, to have someone who doesn't draw very nice and doesn't know what colors go together, but they can design interactions simply or something?
No, I mean, I think specializing is like invaluable. Like, of course there's room, like, specializing is really, really important, because once you get to that point, like I was talking about at the end, where you move more into like a waterfall kind of thing, it's really important to have those people that can just get down into the nitty gritty and, like, really concentrate on the details of how things work. That's where it's really important. I literally have had project managers who have no sort of art background at all and are definitely schedule people come through, and it's the same as, like, if you go to a user test and somebody's like, oh, I wish you would have just put this here. answer, and you're like, oh wow, like why didn't I think of that? Differing perspectives are really important, and it doesn't really have a lot to do, especially when you're like coming up with ideas and sketching and concepting. Like what it looks like is really kind of irrelevant at that point, especially since you're working on a team of people and there's someone probably there who can pick that up and be like, oh, I can make this better, but I see what your point is, you know? And letting people like just share their ideas, no matter how bad it looks, that doesn't really matter if there's like the seed of a really good idea there. And I think the most important thing is just having a team around you that supports it and like, you know, encourages that, you know. But yeah, like you can't replace, like if you have a lot of people that are generalists, you end up having people that are good at everything but great at nothing, you know, that kind of thing. Which again, this is kind of why I say that there's no silver bullet and there's not like one like specific way of doing things that's going to make everything great. Because if there was, you know, there'd be everything in the world would be great. This would have been figured out forever ago, and you know the whole world would be amazing, and it's just not, you know, because sorry. We can make it better. You know, like, yeah, I'm rambling now, but there you go.